All right, so on to my favorite part, this humanistic perspective. I always feel like this gives you way more of an insight into humanistic therapy than it does into the understanding of where your personality comes from the humanistic perspective. But hopefully we can understand. All right, so humanistic perspective is two Mac daddies, Maslow and Rogers. Abraham Maslow, you already know from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Carl Rogers, we haven't talked about too much. Okay. Abraham Maslow believed, once again, in that theory of self-actualization, that you must fulfill your potential, but in order to do that, you have to move up the pyramid, to get to the top by fulfilling all of the needs that come underneath it. Okay. Carl Rogers is going to be huge when we get to the next unit and talk about therapy. Carl Rogers' big thing is that he believed that he could provide an environment for his clients to help them grow when they did not receive the correct environment as growing children. He believed that in order for someone to grow, they must have three things provided for them: genuineness, acceptance, and empathy. In theory, your parents are supposed to provide this for you, but Rogers treated so many of his clients, and he called them clients instead of patients. He treated so many clients that did not have anyone providing genuineness, acceptance, and empathy for them that he believed it was his job as the therapist to provide that so that these people could grow through whatever issues they were dealing with. Genuineness is where you can be open with your feelings and still be accepted, meaning that even if you failed at something, you knew at the end of the day that somebody supported you and loved you. And empathy is where you share and mirror feelings. So he also believed that with genuine acceptance and empathy, the growth promoting climate, this was offering someone what is called unconditional positive regard. And you see this if you have loving parents. Like, unconditional positive regard is that your parents will love you no matter what you do. Like, if you do something horrible, your parents very well may be very mad at you and angry at you and punish you, but they're not going to stop loving you. They're still going to view you as a good person. Self-concept are all the thoughts and feelings you have in response to the question, who am I? So, unconditional positive regard, this is a hysterical little cartoon that is not showing unconditional positive regard. It says, just remember, son, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose unless you want daddy's love. Ha 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 ha. All right, we're going to skip that because that's just not going to be what we need. Okay, all right, so that was humanistic perspective, Maslow, Rogers. Okay, the trait perspective for personality is probably, if you see anything on the AP exam, it's going to come from here. The trait perspective says your personality is just described by traits. Like, we're not going to focus on what your parents did. We're not going to focus on your childhood, the nature versus nurture. Trait perspective of personality is we just describe our personality by using traits. Okay, Gordon Allport is the person that came up with this. And he said that instead of explaining why you have the personality that you have, let's just describe it. And we're going to use things like the Myers-Briggs test, where you take Myers-Briggs and it tells you what kind of personality that you have. And once again, it's people's characteristic behaviors and conscious motives. And if it's characteristic behaviors, it's a pattern. It's things that you do consistently. Okay. Factor analysis is a statistical procedure to identify clusters of test items that tap basic components. We've already talked about this before. This is used on a personality test where they analyze how you answer multiple questions and then, come up with the similarities between them to figure out what kind of personality that you have. Eysenck and Eysenck came up with this right here, which they used factor analysis on a test. Eysenck and Eysenck said that you have 4 traits. You are unstable, stable, introverted, or extroverted, and that's it. There are just 4 traits according to Eysenck and Eysenck. And then when you take a test, they figure out which quadrant you fit in. And maybe you can look and see. Now, unstable versus stable does not mean like you're an unstable person. It's more just like your personality pattern shifts more than someone who is stable. So if you are someone who is stable and extroverted, you're sociable, you're outgoing, you're talkative, you're responsible, you're easygoing, you're lively, you're carefree, And then these are the people who normally are very, very good leaders. If you're an introvert and you're unstable, you're moody, you're anxious, you're rigid. Sober means that you're like not doesn't mean sober like alcohol. It means like you're a sober person, which means you're not someone who particularly takes part in fun activities. Pessimistic, reserved, unsociable, quiet. So you can figure out probably which quadrant you fit in based off of those descriptions. Okay. Assessing traits, these are just different personality questionnaires and things that you can take. The MMPI is used to assess abnormal personality tendencies. So this means that we use this to figure out people who would have like personality disorders. The one that was on the AP exam, actually the year that I was a grader, the last time I was a grader, was the Big Five. So the Big Five can be remembered because it spells canoe, C-A-N-O-E. You wouldn't have to remember that because you could easily look it up this year on the AP exam, but you need to know what each of these five mean. So the Big Five factors to personality are basically coming up with like the same thing that iSync and iSync did, where they're saying there are 5 big personality traits and you fall like somewhere on them. So let me make this a little bigger so that you can, oops, not what I want to do, see a little better. So you have conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, and extroversion. So you just have to know like what the difference is. If you're conscientious, hopefully you do know what that means. But like it means, you know, you're careful or you're careless or you're disciplined or you're impulsive. If you're agreeable, are you someone who's helpful or are you someone who's uncooperative? If you're neurotic, are you someone who is calm or are you someone who is anxious? Which neuroticism is, are you emotionally stable or emotionally unstable? If you're open, are you somebody who is very independent, or are you somebody who's going to conform to whatever a group says? And then extroversion, you know, if you're an extrovert versus an introvert is someone who's very sociable. They energize from being around other people, versus an introvert is someone who energizes from being by themselves. It doesn't necessarily mean they want to be by themselves all the time. It just means they enjoy their alone time, where an extrovert does not. Okay. And then lastly, the social cognitive perspective. All right, the social cognitive perspective. Hello, we got that word, social cognitive. This is Bandura. Remember Albert Bandura, the Bobo doll experiment? He believed, oh, shocking, that all of your behaviors were learned from modeling. So that your personality is what it is because you are copying what was modeled for you. The big thing you have to know that goes with the social cognitive perspective is reciprocal determinism, and that is meaning that you interact with your environment. So it's like a nature versus nurture deal. Pretty much like if you are somebody who is already outgoing, you are going to choose to be around people who are outgoing. So therefore, you're going to end up getting involved in activities that would make you more outgoing, things like bungee jumping, versus somebody who would not be willing to hang out with people who are that outgoing. All right, the last few things, and this is the big ones that you have to know. Personal control goes underneath this perspective as well. Your sense of controlling your environment rather than feeling helpless. Do you feel like you have a control over your environment, or do you feel like your environment controls you? That's the difference between external locus of control and internal locus of control. The external locus of control is where you believe that outside forces determine your fate, that no matter what you do, you can't control what happens. An internal locus of control obviously makes happier people because you believe that you control your own destiny. Like you believe that you can control what your future is. If you work hard or if you change what you're doing, then it's going to change the outcome. Obviously, people with an external locus of control are not happy because they believe that no matter what they do, it doesn't change their fate. This is important because I do see this as a possibility on the AP exam because it's brought up in 2 different units, and it's something that is easy to put on an AP exam on an FRQ because it's a term that you could easily apply to multiple situations. Learned helplessness obviously comes from that external locus of control. We've talked about learned helplessness before, where something bad happens, you feel like you can't stop the bad from happening, so therefore you just give up and let the bad happen. The example I gave y'all was my dog getting punched in the dog kennel. Like first it would try to attack the punching arm, and then it would just eventually give up because nothing they did would change the outcome. That will drive people to have an external locus of control and obviously then have an unhealthier life. Optimism is a big thing. That's so cute. We just haven't been flapping them hard enough. It's a penguin flying. Haha. Let's see. Any last big things that we need to do? Oh, yes. Okay. All right. Spotlight effect is a term you got to know. Spotlight effect is that we overestimate other people's evaluation of our appearance. The spotlight effect is where like you guys come to school with a zit on your face and you think every single person in the school is going to notice the zit, and nobody notices because no one's looking at your face and nobody cares. We believe that we have a spotlight on us at all times because we think that other people are looking at us more than they actually are. Self-esteem is your self-worth. This might be my favorite cartoon, Dear Diary. Sorry to bother you again. Low self-esteem, get it? Okay. And the last big term, yep, this is the last big term, and this is one that you got to know. Self-serving bias. I love this one. Self-serving bias is that we perceive ourselves more favorably. So we do this like to protect ourselves and really protect our ego. We accept responsibility for good deeds, and we do not accept responsibility for anything that works out bad. This is part of our self-esteem. So we like to believe that we are better than average, and so we view things in a biased way to self-serve our ego. I have the best example for you, even though it's a horrible example this year with our distance learning, but normally this is what happens. So when I get your AP exam scores back, and normally, my kids knock it out of the park. And when I get those awesome scores back, do you know what the first thought in my head is? It normally is, gosh, I am such a fabulous teacher. Look at this. They all killed it. Like that clearly is because of me, because I'm such a good teacher. That's self-serving bias because automatically I want to take the credit for your good scores. So that's serving my bias. Versus if I get the scores back and they're terrible, I do not take the blame. The first thing I think of is, man, what was wrong with this group of kids this year? They clearly didn't work hard enough. Look at their scores. They're terrible, and I'm going to put the blame on you. You're going to do the same thing. If you get a score that's great, you're going to be like, oh man, I got a great score because I'm so smart and I worked hard. And if you get a bad score, it's going to be like, oh, well, Ms. Gibson sucked as a teacher. That's why my score's bad. So once again, we're willing to take credit for things that are good, but we are not willing to take the blame when things are bad. That's self-serving bias. Individualism and collectivism is on here again for cultures. Just remember, we are an individualist culture here in the United States. We pride people for being independent. Collectivist is where pride is taken from being in a group, not from being independent. All right, that was the end of that. I know there's a lot in there that's probably very confusing. Just remember, don't boggle your mind around the concept of personality for this. Just really focus on being able to know what those terms are and how you could come up with examples for them. Thanks, guys.